Welcome to episode number 2 of Up Your Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Lizette Zunon. Today, we're going to tackle a very interesting subject, psychological safety. Our guest today is Rhiannon Galen Persernick. I'm so excited to have you here today, Rhiannon. Let's get started by you introducing yourself. Then I'm going to tell the story of how we met. So let's get started. Tell us about yourself, Rhiannon.
So I am, as Lizette said, Rhiannon, I am a social worker. So I've worked as a social worker for the past 17 years in many different capacities. I've worked in juvenile justice, child welfare, mental health. I've worked in North Carolina, Maryland, and now I live in New York. And at this point in time, I oversee the training department at the organization I work for. With that said, I've tapped my toes into the agile world. I'm very fortunate enough to have an amazing father who has been a coach to me and to many others in agile. Most people know Bob Galen, so it's really fortunate to have someone who has helped me slowly transition into the agile world. So
Awesome.
yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
That's a great introduction, and that's how we met, right? So couple of months ago in April, I believe, or March, I took Bob Galen class, and I've been a fan and a mentor. That has been a mentor to me for a while, and now he's a personal coach, which I love, love, love. And I took his class earlier this year on Certified Agile Leadership, which is an amazing class that I highly recommend to any leader or anybody that strive to be a leader. And this was like days of information, but I remember vividly that on one of the last days or the day before last, we had a topic on psychological safety. And Rhiannon was presenting that topic to us as a group. And that was my first time hearing about psychological safety, not that I didn't know, but nobody ever put it in clear word for me. And so I just want you, in the next 20 to 30 minutes that we're going to be having this conversation, for us to learn, when we say psychological safety, what does that mean to you, Rhiannon?
For me, psychological safety is much more, I think it's hitting on the roots when we think of psychological, we think of mental health. It goes beyond that. It's physical, psychological, mentally, emotionally. Where do I feel and what's that spectrum? So my safety level is based on all of who I am as a person. So for me as a female, I have to think about safety from the fact that I am a female, right? I identify as a cis female. So what does that mean for me being a female? For other people, right, and I'll talk about this from a race perspective, especially now in our current climate, we got to talk about race.
Let's talk about it.
Right?
That's what we're here. Let's talk about it. Yes.
Exactly. So as a white person, I don't ever have to think about my whiteness. So that's not an element of my psychological safety, my whiteness. But for Lizette, as a Black person, you have to think about your race as part of how you define psychological safety. So the other piece of this, it's not just yourself, but it's also the impact that you might have on others and understanding how you impact others and how you understand what impacts them as well. Right. Or not understand, I should say.
Yes. So when we talk about, understanding myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding myself in context with folks around me, because psychological safety happen when we are in an environment, right? Let it be at work, with our friend and family. How does that show up for me being a woman, a Black woman? Mm-hmm. Even let's put another layer to it, an immigrant, because I was not born here. And how does that even start to look like for me? How do I fit in and feel safe in those environments?
So part of that it's starting with the self, and how do you define that? So how do you define your blackness? Where's your level of comfort? And it's all intertwined with the other things that you're saying, right? That's that intersectionality. You cannot separate your blackness from also being a woman, from
Right.
also being an immigrant. They're so intertwined, and how you feel about each of those layers of who you are is part of it. So it starts with you. Where's your level of safety? And that starts with, your own kind of values and beliefs in terms of how you were raised,
Right.
right? When you came over to the United States, I was just speaking to a colleague of mine 2 days ago who talked about he's a Black man from Jamaica, born and raised, only moved here a couple of years ago, and he said, I was not aware culturally of what was going on in America until I moved here. And
Of
so I
course.
challenged him by saying, but if you had moved here 20 years ago, before they started to really publicize the murders that were happening to Black men, you would have had a different experience 20 years ago than you are now. You started understanding American racism when you stepped off that plane. Where if you had come here 20 years ago, it might not have felt that way. It might have been a gradual understanding
Right.
of what racism looked like. So it also depends on timing. Like, when did you immigrate here? You just can't separate out the different elements of who you are, but you can dive into those elements in terms of how you feel. And it also depends on the environment, right? So how you feel as a Black woman in your home is going to be very different, but how you feel as a Black woman in the community that you live in and
Right.
the workplace that you are and how they value you. So it's also that dimensions of like that direct, like the micro all the way to the macro of your world, and what does that look like and how safe you feel psychologically.
Yeah, so for somebody like me, because it's just you and I here, I'm in a male-dominated industry, right? So around men all the time, working with them. So even that dimension that we're talking about is also to be able to feel safe in that dimension. It also require another layer added to it because it's not only how I view myself, but it's also how they view me, in that environment. So talk about, how somebody like me, how do I excel in those kind of environment? Because I have been through, and after I took that training, that's when it became
Yeah,
an eye opening for me that actually, have been with my dimension, Black woman, immigrant from African
yeah.
descent, even with having an accent, all that, and being in those corporate environment with male, the behavior is different, and how I feel safe also is different.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good point, right? So the more I'm aware of myself and kind of how I feel safe and what the things are that I need to feel safe, I can also be aware of how I then impact others,
Mm,
right? And how they feel safe or not safe. And I want to make sure that this doesn't excuse that behavior. Because if you have a white man who's reacting to you as a Black woman, that's on them.
mm,
They need to figure that out.
for
The
themselves.
for themselves, right? The difference is because you are going to be very aware of how they react to you. Though there are things that you can do, and honestly, as as a Black immigrant woman, you're already doing these things probably naturally, or you don't even have to think about it anymore of how you protect yourself. It could be the tone of voice that you present, right? So it becomes more aware of, okay, am I being dismissive towards this white man to just try to acclimate?
Mm,
Am I willing to challenge this white man and not stress so much about how he perceives my tone of voice, right?
right.
Because you don't want to be perceived as the angry Black woman
Yes.
just for being assertive, right? He may
Right.
interpret it as aggressive. Again, that's on him. So with that said, you still have to feel safe to make those steps towards being more assertive. And that's why you have to start with yourself and also be aware of how he or other, not any white man, any white woman
Anybody. Hmm.
reacts to you in terms of who you are and what does that mean,
And it's
right?
so
And then
funny you said that, because I have been in those situations where, I mean, I'm like naturally assertive, and the kind of work that I even do personally, I need to be assertive because I'm about testing, I'm about telling people your code is
mhm,
not working. So by just walking, even early in my career, I was already assertive, but I could see gradually that some people are naturally put off by it, men or
absolutely.
women, white, or even other races, because we have other races also in the tech industry, Asian and all that. But the perception that they have of you right away is different than the perception of they have of you, maybe Rhiannon being a white woman, telling them the exact same thing. So why does that happen?
Absolutely.
Why does that happen?
A lot of it has to do with, so it'll look different in other countries. So I'll just talk about it from the United States perspective is
Totally.
structurally, all of our institutions were founded on racism, right? We were really
Say that
built on that.
again. Say that again.
Right?
Say that again.
All of the institutions in the United States, right? The structures, the businesses, really, the policies and procedures were founded on racism. We left a system of class in Europe and we came over to the United States and we ended up forming a system based on race. And that created that hierarchy of kind of white or black. And if you
Right.
were white and brought into that ideal of what whiteness and white culture looked like, right? Because even Irish, Polish were not initially seen as white when they first came over. They were brought into that whiteness. They were
Right.
allowed to be into that whiteness. And if you weren't that, you were black. So you were put in this kind of other category. And in fact, there are policies and practices that still exist to this day, such as redlining practices
Right.
in in the real estate industry. When you think of how cities are really formed, are based on whether you can have a house here or not, whether I can even show you a house here. It's interesting that you're in Texas because Texas is
Mm.
notorious
Yes.
for their real estate industry being extremely racist.
Right.
And that has fed into what's created a lot of implicit bias that exists in our brains. And the first thing that we implicitly, so unconsciously recognize about people is their color. That's the
Mm.
first thing we recognize. And that's something that's been ingrained in us since birth. The second thing we recognize about people is gender,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So now you've got two strikes against you, Lizette. Right, the first thing they recognize about you is your blackness. The second thing they recognize is the fact that you're a woman. And by the way, when we say gender, it isn't the fact that they recognize even men. So a white man walking down the street is almost invisible to an extent.
Exactly. That's
But
true.
they've already been given so much privilege, and especially in American culture and society. And so those are things that create that initial reaction in our heads. And our brains actually have been created for safety purposes. So when we think of psychological safety, it's like we literally have a physiological reaction when we see people, and it's our brain that has that reaction, that fight, flight, or freeze reaction. So when
Right.
I walk into a building for the first time, right? So you're walking into your tech industry building for
Yes.
the first time,
Which I'm
your
the
fight,
only person looking like me
right?
on
Your
top of
fight,
that.
exactly, right? Your fight, flight, or freeze mode, it is like buzzing. And the
Mm,
reality
right.
so is everybody else. So all the white people who aren't used to seeing you walking through the door, they're also buzzing and not understanding what does this mean. So that's the reaction we're getting. And the more we become cognizant, right, very consciously aware of how we react to people and aspects of their diversity, the more we can hold on to our reactions and then the outward reactions towards that. So
Totally.
if I'm seeing someone like you as a white woman, and I'm aware that I've had a very visceral reaction to you in the past, I've got to own that and work towards it. And I can't expect you to do that work for me. That's the other thing about white culture is we've
Right.
expected people of color, women, right? We expect women to teach men how to behave. We expect people of color to teach white people how to behave. We
Right.
expect immigrants to teach Americans how to behave, and it has to change. We have to shift that culture. Now that's a whole nother topic that
Yes,
we dive
but that's a good
into.
point. That's a good point that you touch, especially how the safety alarm starts turning on for each person. So let's shift gear and talk about in the workplace too. The whole idea that everybody's talking now, bring your whole self to work, because there's a reckoning happening. Everybody's like, this is not right. We need to change.
Yeah.
We want diversity. We want inclusion, and we want you to bring your whole self to work. What does that
Yeah.
mean first? But are we even ready to have people bring their whole self to work? What need to happen? I feel like I give you 3 questions, but
So it goes back to the start of this conversation in terms of the elements of diversity. So there's a huge understanding of what it means in terms of who I am as an individual. Part of that is personality, right? I'm a very sarcastic, goofy,
you take it from your
laid
dad.
back. I do. We are.
In a
We're
good
also a
way, in
little
a good
self.
way.
I was just gonna say one thing we're not so good at is we're both also very self-deprecating a little bit.
That's
So
perfect.
we try to downplay kind of who we are as people, and we're stubborn. That's my personality, and I have to be aware of that because there's some personalities and people who love sarcasm, and there are people who are like, I don't get sarcasm.
Yes.
Right, so that's one part of your whole self, is that personality. And that's that like internal dimension of who you are. The next piece are those external dimensions that I can't control about myself. And I have to be aware of how they impact me and how they then externally impact others, right? That's being a female. And not just a female, but a cisgender female. So you also understand that gender identity is a part of this.
Right.
What does that look like? The fact that I am a mother, I have 2 children. So being a mother, although that's something I have a little bit of a choice with, but it's a part of who I am. I'm white, so I have to be aware of my whiteness. And how does that impact me? And then how do I impact, or how does that impact others? And then it's also, you brought up the point of, business. What field do I go into? I'm a social worker. I work in a predominantly female field. So I've never once thought that I couldn't rise all the way up and be a CEO. With that said, if you look at most of the people who are in top positions in social welfare, it's men. So that's also interesting how, even though statistically we're mostly women, you definitely still see men in the higher positions in this field. And so that also is an impact of that. But then there's also, to your other questions, like, how do you know if an agency is ready or an organization is ready for it? What are their practices? What are their policies and procedures that really make a difference? I love when people ask about, what's your culture like? And they're like, well, we're just a lot of fun. Okay, well, how do you make sure
the
that you're
best
fun?
one is when they say we have a pool table, we do happy hours. It's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about.
Exactly, right? The thing that makes sense there, though, is that it's concrete things that say we're fine. People forget that actually doesn't make you feel safe. Just because I can have fun somewhere does not make me feel safe. I want to know that as a mother, if I'm going to have another child, that you have a lactation room that's private. And I remember when New York City recently passed the law that you had to have a specific lactation room. My partner was working he's in IT, he was working at a company, and they were going to turn one of the bathrooms. They were going to keep it a bathroom, but make a separate section for the women to go and to pump breast milk. I'm like, do you know how unsanitary the bathroom is?
Like, give it a little bit more thought, please.
Right? So there's no safety there when you think of that policy or practice that's concrete enough. And really the word that I think is important to say here is empathetic enough. Right? Where's the empathy? Especially now with COVID-19, I mean, I'm in New York.
Right.
I'm in an essential
It
field,
looks like you
and
just passed the ball to us here in Texas
I did, right?
in a
They were
bad
like,
way,
here,
but
hey, right? But it's a good point in terms of you. 1 month ago, you might have felt safe going back to work, but now there's a good
right.
chance you don't. So what are the practices and really what's the empathy that people are having? So if I don't have awareness of who I am and the different dimensions of my diversity, I cannot be empathetic towards you and
That's
how
true.
your dimensions of diversity matter to you. So if I was not aware of my whiteness and the negative way that my whiteness impacts you as a Black person, I can never be empathetic. So it
Right.
has to start with the self, and then you can move to the external factors, and then you can start changing your own movements and actions, and then you can slowly start changing and the way you connect with others. But
Right.
it really starts at that individual level. So if I really want to see if an organization is ready, I want to see what that CEO is doing.
Mm.
And there's a good chance I'm not really going to know, but who can I get close enough to the CEO to see what their practices are, their self-awarenesses in terms of how deep and far they're willing to go to be empathetic towards me and
Right.
in terms of the dimensions that impact me. And that's
Right.
so important to think about.
I mean, you made some great points. For me, I feel like just looking at the CEO alone is no longer practical because leadership starts from the top. I agree, right? But the
Mhm.
middle management is really where all the best behavior die. Like all the best practice, everything that the CEO wants, it dies in middle management because, like you say, everybody else in the bottom, all the individual contributor. I will give you a couple of examples in terms of safety throughout my career. As an immigrant, for instance, when when I want to take a vacation and I want to go in Africa, for instance, 5 or 7 days does not work for me. I
Oh, no.
need 2, 3, or 4 weeks, even. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
naturally will collect all my PTO and wait for like the perfect timing where I could get 3 to 4 weeks to go on vacation. And I
And that's really nothing. 3-4 weeks to go to Africa. I mean, how long does it take you to travel?
Exactly. It takes you like literally 24 hours to get there and come back. So you already losing 2 days. But in this specific, so throughout my career, I've always been lucky
Yeah.
to have middle management that understood that, either because they're also an immigrant or because they have that
Mhm.
empathy again toward us. But a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, I was working as a manager and middle management, my VP literally threw a tantrum when I said I was gonna take a 3 weeks vacation. Literally threw a tantrum. And
Yep.
so it's the same thing. It's like, okay, this is the best company, we have the best culture, but you are not even capable of understanding why somebody, will need.
Correct.
And she was making already comment that, oh, people like to take so many days of vacation, and I'm like, do you even understand how long, like we were just saying, it takes to even have that trip to go to those places and come back? Because
Yeah.
most American, the vacation is
No.
like the farthest they can go is Bahamas, or Dominican Republic, which is like 3 or 6 hour flight. That's all. That's like the best vacation for them. But for me to go see
Mhm.
my grandmother or see my dad or my mom, I need to fly like over
Yeah.
16 or 24 hours flight. So little things like
Exactly.
that. And when that happened to you in a company, it does not matter all the information that they have on their website, in the pamphlet about the best
Correct.
place to work. But this, you don't feel safe
Mhm.
anymore because for you,
Exactly.
taking a PTO is the most crucial thing for your
Mhm.
viability to come back and be
Yep.
successful and be a great performer, and you cannot even successfully take that vacation perfectly. So just a little
Absolutely.
example to tell you that empathy, is important, like you mentioned, as part of
Yep.
the safety, but another thing with safety that I want you to touch before we close is how not only it allow us, we need to be inclusive, but we also need to be able to make mistake. I need to be able to, because I feel like be able to make mistake, be able to
Yeah.
win, be able to lose, depending on the job that you have. but
Yeah.
also it allows innovation because you let people to feel safe to do what is best for the organization, for the collective, for the tribe, you know. So can you
Yeah.
comment on that? What do you think? I want to say, how about I find myself in an organization where those are not, I'm not feeling really safe about it, but I'm really want to feel safe. What should I do as a part of the collective?
So I'm actually going to go back a little bit to your example because I think it's important to recognize that your manager's response to you was their reaction to not feeling safe. So you
Wow.
saw their
Mm-hmm.
right? And we all
Mm-hmm.
fight differently. So that fight, flight, or freeze that kicks in. So
Mm.
you said she threw a tantrum, which I love, by the way, because that's exactly what it was. Let's own it. She felt unsafe, so her tantrum was her fighting and not feeling safe. And I wanted to go back there because I think it helps answer that question of how we make mistakes. First, I want to know what I look like when I make a mistake and
Mm.
where do I feel safe and what's my behavior, right? So
Right.
how many, let's think back on mistakes that we have made in the past and now take a deep breath and think about what was the fight, flight, or freeze that you did. Were you a runner and you didn't address it?
Mm.
So individually, I want to know because I think about it from a team perspective. I want my team to know what it looks like when I make a mistake and then how I'm going to handle it. Because
Own
I'm the
it.
kind of, right, I'm going to own, but some people don't. So some people
Right.
have been taught, and that's also part of the culture. So your culture is going to be very different in terms of how you were raised to deal with mistakes. I've got two little girls, and I always tell them it's not about the mistake, it's about the fix. So tell me
Yeah.
what you did wrong, and then tell me how you're going to fix it. Because I grew up feeling like a mistake was going to mean punishment. And that's
Right.
because that's a very Americanized way of looking at mistakes. So you're up against that culture, Lizette. Like,
Mm.
you don't make mistakes. You have to
Right.
eat it. So I freeze.
Swallow.
I swallow it. And then I do everything I can in my power to fix it. But that means killing myself sometimes,
Right.
emotionally and physically, that I never learned from that. And then there's chances that my supervisor, my manager, doesn't even realize that mistake was even made.
Exactly.
Right. The first, I want to start here. I want to own kind of what it is that I do when it comes to mistakes. And I want to be open to communicate that. I also want to be open to ask that expectation of the people who are around me. So if you and I were colleagues, I'd want to know, what do you expect from me about
Right.
mistakes? And if I make a mistake, what would help you trust that I can fix it? And I'd want you to share the same thing so that concretely I feel safe with you to make a mistake because you trust that I'm going to fix it. And you feel
Wow.
safe with me to make a mistake because this is how it looks like for you. So if you do throw a tantrum, because I've been there before where I've made a mistake and I threw a tantrum and I blamed everybody else around me. And everybody, but they knew, this is Rhiannon. I trust her. Give her a minute. Right, I'm thinking about my 2.5-year-old, right, when she makes a mistake, she starts throwing that tantrum, kicking her feet, and then 5 minutes later she goes, I'm sorry, mommy, I love you. but
Exactly.
if you tried to intervene and make her feel embarrassed, it's just going to blow up. That
Right.
the same thing happens whether you're 2.5 or 40.
Right.
So it's
Exactly.
important to recognize, what does it look like for me? Can I share that? Share it.
Mm.
And really have that open dialogue, right? As a manager myself, I ask that of the people I work with. A really solid manager,
Right.
director, AVP, right? Wherever they are at, if they're really good at their job, they're going to actually ask that question. What do you
Right.
need from me so that you can make a mistake?
Wow.
What does it look like when you make mistakes?
Yeah, basically make the agreement so you know how you
Exactly.
communicate. Yeah, I totally
What's
agree
that
with that.
mutual conversation in terms of clear expectations and to recognize that sometimes I have no clue what
Exactly.
it
And
looks
I'm good
like.
at that actually. I always started by, and I feel throughout the year, I feel like it just make people safe, that they know that, this is a safe place. It's good to use that word. Not, but not only use that word, but you need to like emulate the behavior, meaning, oh,
Yeah.
I made a mistake. Oh, call me out when I make a mistake, and I'm gonna own it in front of everybody because I'm not perfect. I'm a human
Yep.
being and I'm a work in progress. And I think
Yeah.
when you come like that as a leader, people naturally, will open themselves up. They bring
Absolutely.
all the value or information or innovation that they have to the table. And then it make everything goes well and you move forward in a very concrete way. I really like that approach.
Absolutely.
So
The other thing though is it isn't just to emulate the behavior, it's also sometimes to challenge the behavior. Right now I have
mm,
an amazing coworker, right? I who I just value so much. She's a Black woman, and her previous supervisor, who's now both our supervisors, she's right, she's above us now and I
right.
supervise her. Um, she was very hard on her. She
Mm-hmm.
kept telling my colleague, "You have, I'm gonna say you have RBF, resting bitch face, and you need to fix it." So here's,
Okay.
and let me preface by saying, here's a white woman telling a Black woman, "You
Exactly.
have resting bitch face, and you gotta fix this."
Like
So the
that's two strike in one. Like
right, it's just like, and so when I first started working with her to supervise her, I said, "Look, tell me what you need from me." And she just said, "I need you to be honest and open with me." And I said, "Great." And so the first thing I said to her is,
easy.
"I will never talk about this. I will never talk about your face. I promise you. But what I will talk about is how I can help you improve, because if I see something, I want to say something. So
Right.
how can I say it to you so that it matters?" And one of the first feedback I gave her was that she was half-assing her job. And I
Mm,
think it's because you don't have faith in yourself. You don't
the
have enough
confidence.
confidence
Yes.
in what it is that you're good at. And
Right.
I want to help you get there. So the other thing is, you also as a manager want to make sure that you've taken the time to really understand who your workers are and are
Totally.
willing to challenge them from a place of empathy,
Totally.
and assume the most generous assumptions about them. And I want to say that quote is from my social work hero, Brene Brown. She says
Oh,
to assume the most generous assumptions about people. That if I can generously assume that you're coming from a good place and you're trying your hardest, that's empathy. And that
yes.
means that everything that I say to you will be empathetic. And if I
Yes.
can't assume generously, then I'm being judgmental and the door is shut.
Yes.
So
Yes.
as a manager, we really have to make sure we do that as much as possible.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always say is people, I mean, nowadays people are not going to office, but I used to say nobody leave their house going to office to do a bad job. Everybody has a
Yeah.
positive intention when they leave their house to come and do
Yes.
something great. So you got
Yeah.
to come from that level of, empathy first. And then, you don't talk at them, but you talk to them about what is the feedback that you want to give. And I think when you do it that way, in a very safe way, anybody, man or woman, black or white or whatever you want to add in there, they will take it. They will understand it. They will accept it nicely.
Yeah.
So this has been great. This has been great. Um, Last thing that I wanted to ask you is as a professional, when we did that training, I really had an eye opening because I never saw that, for a long time I felt like I had PTSD pretty much, of somebody
Mhm.
battling in the workplace and never feel safe. It's like going from
Yeah.
one position to another, being successful in my career, in my work, but
Yeah.
emotionally not being safe. So what is, and I think you mentioned it at the beginning, but let's close with that. What is the mental health toll that you and I get, or whoever we get, when we spend our time in a very unsafe environment for a long time? What is the mental health toll?
I like to look at it in comparison, like weight, like the weight on your
Oh
shoulders, right?
Lord, that word
And I think that helps to create the visual, right? So
yes.
I'm white. So I'm a white person. So no weight. There's no weight on my shoulder for being white. But I'm a woman, so let's say that's 50 pounds. So picture yourself carrying around 50 pounds of weight
Don't get
every
to
day
me.
for being a woman. Right? You're right. Exactly. You're like, don't get to Lizette. But I will, because I think it's important that that's where empathy comes from, is
Right.
understanding that, right? As a mom,
Oh
because I'm
Lord.
constantly debating whether to work or not. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say that's another 50 pounds. So that's 100 pounds of weight that I carry. If I work for a company that helps me manage that weight, it's always there, by the way. I'm always
Right.
carrying around that extra 50 pounds.
Right.
The
Right.
difference is if I have working for a company that allows me to manage that weight, then I'm not going to feel the heaviness of it so much. But if
Right.
they don't, then I'm constantly feeling the push and pull. And that 100 pounds can sometimes feel like 500 pounds. So it is important to then also address it from your perspective, right? So you're black, so that's 100 pounds of weight. Because you're black and you're a woman, you don't just get 50 pounds of weight for being a woman. You get another 100 pounds because your being a woman is added on to the fact that you're also black. So that's
Right.
200 pounds of weight compared to my 100 pounds.
Right.
Now let's add, now you're an immigrant, right? Let's add another 100 pounds or 100, let's do 150, because you got to add on for the fact that you're black woman and an immigrant.
And
So
I'm a
now you've
mom. I'm a mom, so
got, so now you're a mom. So you probably, let's just say you've got 500 pounds of weight that you are carrying around on your back every day. Again,
wow.
this is compared as a white woman mother. I've got 100, right? I said,
Mm-hmm.
you've got 500.
And then
So
I
for
walk.
a company to make you feel safe, they've got to give you the resources and supports so that you
Right.
can manage 500 pounds. So that's where I get very frustrated when people talk about equality, when they
Yes.
need to talk about equity,
That's a
right? If we
different
talk about
show. Oh my God.
I know, but it matters from a psychological safety standpoint,
Yes.
because a
Yes.
company 100% has to do a hell of a lot more for you than they
Exactly.
have to do for me. And what happens is we look at the Rhiannons of the world and we
Yes.
forget about the Lizettes of the world, and we think
Right.
we're doing enough, but we're
Yes.
not, because you've only helped Lizette carry 50 pounds of weight.
Yes.
So now she's still got 450 pounds that
Exactly.
she's managing. And we haven't even started about the actual work you're doing. Remember
Exactly.
that.
Yes. The
We didn't
actual
talk
work.
about the actual work. So I think that's important too. And I hope that helps create the visual of what we're
Yes,
talking about.
totally. I think that's a great
The,
visual because I never saw it
right,
that way.
the
It's
psychological
totally
safety is right there. That's the meat of it. Is how much weight has society put on my shoulders, and how can this company truly help me manage that so I can get the work done. You have to work twice as hard to get that work done, because you've got 4 times as much weight on your shoulders
yes,
than I do.
yes,
And
yes.
that isn't safe. So I'm never going to feel safe unless that there's practical changes to the culture of that organization.
Right, right. That's amazing. Thank you. I love it. I love it. I want to finish up with a beautiful quote that I saw. If you can learn to harvest the full fruit of psychological safety, you will transform family, school, organization, and society. Enable people to realize their deep yearning to live happy, connected, creative, contributing, and more beautiful life. It's from Timothy Clark from the book Four Stage of Psychological Safety, and that is a book that I highly recommend. I spent some time yesterday just reading a couple of articles about it, and I think he's hitting those four stages, and he is really breaking it down, even more than we have touched. But I love it. Thank you so much, Rhiannon. I appreciate you. I'm sure you have enlightened so many of our listeners that will listen to this podcast. And thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much. Thank
you.
you.
This was such an honor, Lizette. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.